I will now hand over to the committee manager, Mr. Taylor.
Good afternoon. This meeting is being held under the recent government regulations brought in to allow for remote meetings to take place and to allow for legislative decisions to be made. Hopefully those present will hear the meeting. However, in the event of a technical failure, the chairman will adjourn the meeting and set a new time for its reinstatement. Please note that the meeting is being recorded and a copy of the recording will be available on the Council's YouTube channel in the next few days. All members of the committee should have their video on, but should remain muted until invited to speak. If you wish to attract the chairman's attention, please make use of the instant messaging facility if possible, and the format of the meeting will be as per the agenda published. Over to you, Chairman.
Thank you. I'm now going to ask each committee member and officer who is taking part in the meeting to introduce themselves and confirm they can see and hear me before we start the official business of this committee. Councillor Will Human.
I can see and hear you clearly.
Councillor Nick Bayliss, he's apologies, am I correct?
That's right, Chairman.
Councillor Hilary Bruce.
Yes, hi, Hilary Bruce. I'm member for Bridgewater Fairfax. I can hear and see everyone perfectly. If I look like I'm looking up, it's because I'm looking at another screen for the minutes and the agenda and stuff. I'm not being too rude. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ian Dyer.
You're muted, Councillor.
Yes, I can hear and see you and hear everything. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Mike Facey.
Yes, President, correct, ma'am. I can hear and see everything.
Thank you very much. Councillor Liz Levy.
I can see and hear everything.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rachel Lilly, is she still having problems? I'll come back to her. Councillor Alan Matthews.
Yes, I can see and hear everything.
Thank you. Councillor Lisa Methley.
Thank you. I can see and hear everything.
Thank you. Councillor Diego Rodriguez.
Yes, I can hear and see everything. Thank you.
Okay. The Town and Parish Council representative, Julian Taylor.
Yes, I can see and hear most of you.
Thank you. And the independent person, Veronica Horman.
Hello. Yes, I can see and hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jeff Lewis has apologised, hasn't he?
That's right, Chairman.
Okay, I'll now move on to the officers. Alex Walling.
Hi, Chair. Yes, I could see and hear everything.
Thank you very much. Alistair Woodland, is he here or is he?
Yes, Chairman, I can see and hear everything. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Adam Williams.
Yes, I can see and hear everything. Thank you.
Alison Turner.
Good afternoon. I can see and hear everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Simon Handy.
I believe Simon may be joining us nearer the time of his item.
Okay. And I take it that's the same with Angela Farmer as well and Joe.
I think Angela Farmer may be in the meeting, but they will come later on. Yes, Chairman.
Right. Okay. So now we can actually. I think I've gone through that. Have we got Rachel back on?
I believe IT are trying to resolve the issue at the moment, so we'll carry on, Chairman, and pick her up where we.
That's lovely. Thank you very much, Mr. Steve. Right, apology. Sorry, agenda item number 1. Apologies for absence.
Yes, Chairman. Apologies from Councillor Nick Bayliss and Jeff Lewis.
Thank you very much. Is there any urgent business?
No, Chairman.
Has anybody registered to speak?
Nope.
Thank you. And it's for the members now. Declaration of interest. No. Thank you very much. So we'll now go on to the first number 5, agenda item number 5, external audit progress report. So I'll hand over to Alex Walling, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm filling in at the last minute because David was supposed to be joining you today, but unfortunately David's not very well, so I've stepped in. So if I could just take you through the progress report. So in terms of where we are on the external audit for 1920, so turning to page 4 of the paper that you've got. In terms of the financial statements audit, so we obviously undertook our initial planning at the back end of last year and supplemented by some work in February and March. we have started our final accounts audit, and the deadline for which has been moved back to the 30th of November, which is MHCLG moved that back in light of COVID. We're still aiming to get our work done by then, but there is a danger, because what we're finding is that under remote working, our work is taking significantly longer. There is a danger that we might miss that deadline, and I'm talking to Alison Turner as CFO about that on a regular basis. In terms of COVID-19, obviously we're working remotely, although our offices are back open. We're tending to use them for people who perhaps really need to be in the office, perhaps for well-being reasons. So most of us have not been back into the office, and we're continuing to work from home using things like MS Teams, which I have to say has been brilliant. But the work is taking longer as a consequence. In terms of our value for money work, so we did our initial risk assessment earlier in the year, and we'll be supplementing that by the detailed work shortly, a lot of which we'll be looking at things like the financial sustainability of the council. So obviously it's linked to our accounts work as well. Moving over the page then, in terms of the other areas of work that we do, so two key claims that we look at. One is the housing benefit subsidy return, which many of you will be aware of. And again, the DWP has moved the deadline for that to the end of January. Again, we're hopeful to meet that deadline, but at the moment our priority is very much around delivering local government accounts across the Southwest and nationally as well. In terms of the other claim that we look at, it's the pooling of housing capital receipts, and again our aim is to complete that by the due deadline, and I think we're still waiting for the final guidance on that from the MHCLG. Continue to have regular meetings with the finance team to find out what's happening within the council, but also what the impact is on that, on both the audit for 1920, but also starting to think about the audit for 2021. Clearly COVID has had much more of an impact on 2021 finances than it did on 1920, so we continue to keep that under view. I'm set out there a little bit around audit fees, and I talk about, we've previously had communications around audit fees for 1920, and I've actually recently emailed the Section 151 officer around the potential impact of additional fees around COVID on our 1920 audit. As I say, we're finding that nationally, both ourselves and other audit firms as well, is the work is taking considerably longer, and obviously there's a financial impact on that as well. In terms of audit deliverables, so I've talked through quite a few of those areas already. As I say, we aim to get the accounts done by the end of November, but as I say, there is a danger at the moment that we may not hit that deadline. As we move into November, we'll have a better idea of where we are, and obviously, as I say, then we can come back and talk to yourselves about what the impact of missing that deadline is. Probably a small comfort, I appreciate, but actually last year I think only something like 45% of local government audits were actually completed by the due deadline, as I say, both within Grant Thornton and other audit suppliers as well. Page 7 of the report gives you a bit of an update around COVID-19 and what that's meant, both in terms of, obviously we talked about remote working, but also it has had an impact on some of the work that we've actually had to do. We've had to do some of our work in a slightly different way, and also bear in mind things like investments and the value of property, plant and equipment, fixed assets has changed considerably as well. Obviously the markets are much more volatile as a result of COVID, and that has had an impact on financial accounts within local government. I'm going to skip ahead then in terms of the report and just talk about two of the papers that are in the sector update, if that's okay, very briefly. The first is the Redmond review, which is on page 15. The Redmond review is a review done by Tony Redmond, and obviously he's made a number of recommendations within the local government sphere to the MHCLG. One of which is talking about the potential for having a new regulator for local audits. But he's very keen to stress this is not going back to the Audit Commission days, for those of you who've been around long enough to remember that. So it's not akin to that. But he also says that he feels that actually audit fees within the local government sphere are too low, and that might be an area that needs to be looked at. And also suggested that there's a move back to the September deadline for local authority deadlines for their accounts. It was moved forward last year to the end of July, and as I say, I think most audit suppliers actually really struggled to actually deliver to that deadline. So that's the Redmond review, and the only other one I was going to mention was on page 16, which is around the Code of Audit Practice, which has changed for 2021. So we're sort of looking forward. The NAO's code, and that was laid before Parliament back in April. Key change in there is around value for money, and this slide sets out what the changes are. The idea is that we move away from the binary qualification or non-qualification, the value for money conclusion, and it's much more of a commentary around your overall arrangements, and we actually look at all the areas that are covered by the code. At the moment we risk assess, and we tend to focus in then on the area with the most risk and talk about that, but that obviously doesn't give you and stakeholders a really good feel for what other areas that you have around your arrangements to secure VFM, and actually give those assurances that actually those arrangements are in place. So that will be changing, but that'll be something for 2021, and hopefully at the next audit committee I'll be able to come back and give you a little bit more detail about what are the areas that we'll be looking at. We're waiting for the final audit guidance that's going to come from the NAO on this particular area. That's all I was going to say in terms of the progress report and the sector update, but I'm more than happy to take questions.
Are there any questions, members?
So, can I just ask a quick question about the Redmond review?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. It was just about the way that you can respond to the review, that it requires legislation, but there are some things that authorities could start doing now. I'm not sure whether the second and third point, one of them we do already, possibly having an independent member for the audit committee. Is that already in place? Yeah. And then the formalising the meeting annually, the third point, is that something that's already in place?
Certainly I have regular meetings with the finance team, and in the past I've met with the chief exec and the monitoring officer. I have to confess, probably in the last 12 months or so that's slipped off the agenda, but that's certainly something, if the audit committee were interested, we could probably resume going forward.
Okay.
Are there any more questions, members?
Hello.
Sorry, who's that? Sorry.
Councillor Taylor.
Hi, Julian.
Yeah, perhaps it's beyond the scope of this meeting, but I've looked at page 8, and it does raise significant questions about the funding gap and the implication of the council. And I wonder what preparations are in place to do this. That's the first one. Secondly, there are increased costs, and there's a change in shopping habits. There's long-term implications here for funding coming into the council. Then there's the question about Brexit and what's that's going to happen. And the third one is obviously about the coronavirus, where test and trace is not particularly effective. And I just wondered whether it's expected that there will be additional costs on the council as we become involved in these activities to protect our communities.
Who's going to be answering that? Is that you, Alex?
I think it's probably better that the finance team, Alison, answers that, if that's okay.
Sorry,
Yes,
Julie, I put my hand up. I didn't.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I can see it now. Sorry.
I think if I put it down now. Yeah, I have. Yeah, just in terms of the funding gap that you raised, in terms of COVID, we've already reported in the initial medium-term financial plan, which went to executive, I think it was the 30th of September, end of September, the impact so far that we're estimated in terms of COVID. We have had funding from government. We've had specific funding for things like homelessness. And we've also had some funding come in quite recently in terms of some of the track and trace type stuff, but we're not heavily involved in that at this stage. But we have still got a funding gap that we've reported, and it was about sort of 2.5–3 million over this year and next year that we're estimating. Clearly, you know, we won't know the full impact until some time yet, particularly on things like council tax collection and business rates income. But in the medium-term plan, what we've said is that we could fund that gap through some of our specific reserves if members choose to, or we would have to look to sort of make some reductions or bring in some increased income. In terms of our normal funding gap, if you like, that we're reporting, the plans that we've got in place in terms of our increase in income and delivering savings through the customer access program are still in place to close that gap. So there is a funding gap, but we've sort of got a plan in place to close that. But it's constantly changing, and clearly if we go into another lockdown, then again it would have another impact. So we are constantly monitoring that. We have to submit back to the government in terms of the impact on COVID. So that's something that's monitored really closely. I think have I answered?
Can I follow that up, please? That's very helpful. Thank you. And the other bit is, which is I can't see it in the report, or maybe I've missed it, but presumably there's going to be an impact on the council investments in terms of the value of those investments, the ability to borrow money, and also the income coming in.
Yeah, just to follow up. So when we did the initial medium-term plan, we have made a provision for potentially loss of income on investments. I expect you remember that we've put quite a bit of money into specific pooled funds because we were getting a really good return on those, and we have brought down the anticipated or estimated interest on our funds due to the current climate. I mean, again, it's really difficult to make predictions, but we have brought the income down by, I think, about just over 300,000, something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Total. And
the drop in value on the investments?
Well, at the moment, we haven't got figures on the drop in value, but it's only an issue if we take the money out in terms of the value. Normally, when you put money into pooled funds anyway, you do lose value to start with, but it's a longer term plan anyway, so we weren't anticipating taking any money out in the near future, not in terms of the pooled funds.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alison. If there's no more questions, all we have to do is to note the external audit activity, and I'd like to thank Alex for her presentation. Thank you. So now moving on to agenda item number 6, which is the internal audit progress report. Adam, are you presenting this?
Yeah, I will be. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to run you through our usual update on internal audit progress. If I can draw your attention to page 2 of the report, it summarises some of the impacts that we too are facing from COVID-19. There is still an impact that is ongoing and obviously will be continued the lockdowns, and there are still challenges with ongoing home working and childcare arrangements, and similar to external audit, it's some of the home working arrangements do result in work taking longer or having to find new ways to adapt to achieve the same objectives as we would have done in the office. As a result of that, we will be keeping the plan under constant review throughout this year, and we will remain flexible do focus on in our audit plan to ensure that we are supporting the changing needs and priorities of the council, but any changes will be reported to this committee. Okay, moving on to page 3, there is a summary of the work that has been completed since our previous update, but do note there is some work that has been undertaken to support the council in terms of COVID-19, where we have completed some additional assurance work around the grant system, by completing some CIFAS checks, which are completed on the individual payments that were made, and checking the recipients against the National Fraud Database for areas of potential fraud, and for the service to then be able to investigate any matches that did yield. Our reports also provide further detail on any audits that have received limited or no assurance within the period. And as you can see from this table, there are no audits that have received limited or no assurance. And we also have no audits that we have identified as having a high corporate risk. So good news in that respect. So if I move on to pages 5 to 7, this summarises the follow-up work that we've completed. Follow-ups usually we complete based on an audit that has received a partial or no assurance audit within the previous year, and then we follow them up to make sure that actions that were agreed are being completed. So we have the tables on the ALMO management agreement show that progress is being made on a number of recommendations or are complete, and that's on page 5. Page 6, there is a table summarising the progress made on payroll, and I believe there was an update presented to this committee previously by the manager summarising the priority 2 that could not be completed. I believe that was provided by the head of IS back in March, and that is the action that is still outstanding. And as you can see, there is a revised timescale for November 2020 on that one. And performance management as well, where there were a few recommendations still outstanding, but a lot of these are hinged around one action being completed, and then you have that cascade effect where a number of others will all be able to follow. And there is a sort of draft strategy in place, and it just requires that formal approval. Okay. Moving on to page 9, this provides a bit more detail on the additional work that we have sort of completed and the changes to plan. Do note that at this point in time, we have not actually dropped any audits from our plan as yet, but we will need to sort of keep this under review, especially if we do pick up additional pieces of work, just to make sure that we are only focusing on the sort of high levels of risk and the areas that we need to focus on this year. Page 10, just to draw your attention to, we have changed our internal audit assurance definitions for all audits completed from April 2020. It's only a small change where previously we had a partial assurance that has now changed to limited, and no assurance where previously we had none. But the wording around these definitions has changed, and it's just to highlight to members to familiarise yourself with these new definitions, because that's what we will be assessing work against going forwards. Okay, and then just heading down to the final page on page 12, this provides a summary of the work we completed, as well as the work that is at draft or in progress or not started, just to keep you aware of where we are within the audit plan, and for members to sort of be aware and to ask any questions. Okay, thank you for your time. If there's any questions, please ask. Thank you.
Are there any questions, members?
Julie?
Yes.
Just going back to, I think it was page 5. Sorry. Click my computer. I think there's the deadline that we were waiting for a follow-up through was so on the ALMO management agreement. Right at the bottom of the page, it's the outstanding recommendation is a revised implementation date of 30th of September. Completed, is that?
This will be at the time we did the audit. The recommendation at that time, they would have revised the date for 30th of September. I believe this will form part of the recommendation tracking that Simon presents to committee later. So if that's still outstanding, it should be included within that one there.
Right, okay. All right, thank you.
Are there any more questions, members? Okay, well, I'd like to thank Adam for his report, and we'll now move on to agenda item number 7, overdue swap actions. Is David Baxter or Simon Tandy there?
I'm just trying to get them into the meeting, Chairman.
Thank you.
I believe they're now in the meeting, Chairman.
Okay, so if I can, are they both there, Steve, or just one?
I believe they're both there. Mr. Tandy, are you in the meeting?
I am here, yes.
Okay, right, thank you.
So we're on the overdue swap actions, Simon Tandy. So could you just give us a quick report, please?
Yes, sure. So we currently have 2 overdue high-level swap audit recommendations. Both are from the Somerset Independence Plus Partnership Governance Advice Audit from August 2019. There are 2 actions from that audit which are currently past their due dates, both of which belong to the Strategic Housing Manager, Dave Baxter, who is also present at the meeting, and he is here to give you an overview of what's happening with those actions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's difficult to know what to say to this. I've been here before. So we have got to the stage where we're all in agreement with Somerset County Council and the other authorities that provide Somerset Independent Plus services to. Somerset County Council need to complete a decision paper for the transfer of the funds, and that's according to their governance team. So I have emailed them, and apparently that is in train. And the issue was that the senior officer in charge changed. Little or no handover, so things that should have been put in place weren't put in place before the new governance officer took over. The officer at county has completed the paper, so we've got both papers complete, or it should be completed imminently. We're just waiting for that decision paper to be approved at county level, and then we can get the thing signed, and I can get it up onto Simon's Pentana actions.
Thank you for that. Members, has anyone got any questions? Well, I've got one question. If this is not signed, what are the implications money-wise to Sedgemoor?
We've been operating for just over 2 years now, Somerset Independence Plus, and basically on trust. So all the funding has been, when we've asked for the funding has been provided. But obviously there is that risk that they could turn around and say, well, there's no signed agreement, which is where we're trying to get to. So at the moment, there's been no implication at all, but obviously all the risk is with Sedgemoor. It doesn't right west of the county at the moment.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any more questions? So we now have to look at, sorry, did somebody want to say something? That's right, my computer's not loading up what I want it to load up. We're looking at which options we're going to go with, A, B, or C. Can someone help me out here? Because as I said, I can't load it at the moment.
The recommendations are A, to note the reasons for slippage and or agree a revised deadline as presented by the responsible officer.
Yeah.
B, request a detailed report back to a future audit and standards meeting. And C, refer the issue to strategic leadership team for consideration and direction on best course of action.
Right.
Madam
Chair. Thank you. Members, has anyone got any opinions or where we should go on this? Personally, I think we should do A, but I'm open to suggestions.
Can I be heard? I'm not sure if we can. Hang on.
We can hear you, Councillor Human.
Oh, you can. Okay, fine. I wasn't sure whether the mute unmuted or not. Sorry. And we've noticed it a couple of times now, haven't we, Madam Chairman? And
Mr. Baxter seeming having a lot of trouble getting a legal agreement for something that did for the protection of the council. Maybe we need to encourage a bit more of a shove. I may be referring it to the strategic team and say there's something not quite right here and we need to get this actioned sooner rather than later. Just my opinion on that.
Any other opinions, councillors, on, or are we going to go with the option C as put forward by Councillor Human?
I'd be happy to second the option C.
Right, okay. So can we have is it a show of hands that we're in agreement with option C?
Or it could be easier, Chairman, on this one, rather than doing a formal vote and going through everybody, just seeing if there's anybody who objects to C.
Right,
if there's no objections, we go that way.
Okay. Are there any objections to us going to item option C? Okay, we'll carry it as that we are going to go to option C. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Baxter and Mr. Townsend.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
The next item on the agenda is number 8, risk management update, and I hand over to Angela Farmer, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon, members. The papers and the registers are in front of you, but I should just give a quick update. This is my 6-monthly update to you of the strategic and operational risks that the Council is currently managing. In brief, we have 16 strategic risks as at September 20 and 28 operational risks as at July 20. Since I last reported, we have changed the strategic risk register to, and it's now broken down more into category than it was previously. So hopefully that is a much more organised approach to the recording of risk. We have also created a high-level fraud risk register as well to monitor the areas of fraud that we are now facing. And we are in the midst of creating a second iteration of the Housing Programme Board risk register. In respect of COVID, although there is one overarching corporate risk that we have, which obviously is the financial impact of COVID, which obviously Alison has mentioned already. We are sort of underneath that. We have got obviously risks we monitor on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis through the gold response group. Those are the risks based on our response to the incident, and we also have and we are also looking at how we identify risk through recovery, both external recovery and internal recovery. At the moment, we are working through the October operational risk review as well, so we will be able to update you on that. Strategic risks go to operational management team. They go roughly every month now. The next one will be the 5th of November. And obviously, as you can see, I come to you every 6 months. So I won't go through any specific risks on the register, but I'm more than happy to take questions from members if there are any.
Are there any question, members, for Mrs. Farmer? As there's no response, I'll take that as a no. And thank you, Mrs. Farmer, for attending the meeting. I'm now moving on to agenda item number 9, contract waivers. And I'd like Joe Hutchings to present, please.
I'm just going to request that Joe joins the meeting, Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
And Councillor Lilly sends her apologies. Her machine needs to go back to Bridgewater
nice.
House for some love and attention. So. Are you with us, Joanne?
I am, sorry.
Sorry, they finished Angela's very quickly, sorry.
That's okay.
Over to you, Chairman.
Thank you. So if you'd like to present for us, please, Joe.
Yeah, so I'm hopefully you've all got a copy of the waiver report that I've submitted. We bring an annual report to Audit and Governance every year to explain the waivers that have been approved during the previous years. This year we've seen a slightly reduced number of waivers coming through, so So between October 2019 and October 2020, we've granted 22 waivers this time. They're on a variety of reasons, seeking to appoint suppliers without quotations being obtained, seeking to appoint consultants or suppliers without competitive tenders being obtained, and seeking to invite quotations where contract standing orders require competitive tenders, or procuring in some other way where that is not otherwise in accordance with contract standing orders, then officers can apply for a waiver to waive the requirement to follow those contract standing orders. Before a waiver is granted, the officer is required to consult with procurement, and they would produce a waiver application, which I then put a comment on and get the Section 151 officer and the monitoring officer to approve. So, this year, the average value of contracts which have sought waivers has been just over 15,000, which again is a slight reduction on where we were in the previous 12 months. This time there have been 7 waivers of a low value, which is classed as below £5,000. And you may recall that we recently brought a report to Audit and Governance suggesting that contract standing orders be reviewed, because the limit for getting quotations has been at £1,000 for very many years, and it was agreed that we would review contract standing orders with a review to putting that up. Now that still needs to go to full council for approval, but once that hopefully gets approval, then the limit, you will be able to procure something up to £5,000 without having to get additional quotes, and therefore the need for a waiver for anything under £5,000 will also be removed. We also had 11 applications for waivers between £5,000 and £30,000, and just 4 waivers this year for over £30,000. So that is also showing quite a reduction. There's a table of the waiver applications that have been granted this year, and just to quickly go through that, we've had a total value this year of £330,457.80 in terms of waivers that have been granted. There have been no waivers for over £50,000, and that will be the new limit once contract standing orders are approved by full council, where we'll need to tender. So actually there's been no waivers granted, which with the new contract standing orders means that we would not have to tender for any of those waivers anyway. So that actually removes that from this list as well. It does, as I said previously, there has been a slight decrease in the number of waivers being awarded, probably partly because of COVID. So certain things that perhaps we would have done previously haven't needed to be done. So that could be a reason for it. I think the biggest waiver that we've had this year has been for procuring some second-hand vehicles, which are only available from the provider that obviously has that vehicle. So that's reasonable to assume that there wasn't a choice in where we bought the particular vehicles from. And most of the others have been seeking to grant a waiver to a supplier that's already been working for the council previously. Are there any questions on that list of waivers? Hopefully you can all see it. Or any questions generally?
It was quite a big one of 60,800 for specialist consultancy advice. What advice was that?
Let me just have a look. I think that was for various consultants. You'll see there were five appointments. So it wasn't one big appointment for 60,000. That was 5 separate waivers for various consultancy appointments. And I know there's been some consultancy, a waiver for instance, for one was to help with the CCTV spec for the CCTV tender that has gone out. I believe there was also a consultant that was helping with the redesign of reception, but that 60,800 is for 5 waivers, so it wasn't one big
no, my apologies.
consultancy appointment.
I failed to see that 5, sorry.
Okay.
Madam Chairman, can I come in on that one, please?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. It was on the same point, really. I was going to ask as well, what sort of cross checks happen? Because if you've got 5 waivers, if those 5 waivers are all separate, but they're going to the same consultancy firm, it may be on different projects, but it's one firm, so it's then going over the limit. Are there any sort of cross checks or
Yes,
controls?
yes, we do check that. I mean, I know, for instance, that there's one consultancy appointment within Sedgemoor where we've used a project manager on a number of projects. But yes, we do keep a check on that. And I think on his particular appointment, it was actually raised in the waiver that the waiver could not be for above a certain amount because that could potentially go over threshold. So yes, we do double check. Because all of the waivers come via me and then go via the Section 151 officer and the monitoring officer, I will always carry out those checks prior to putting my comments on so that the Section 151 officer and monitoring officer are aware of any potential issues in terms of thresholds.
Brilliant, thank you.
Are there any more questions, members, for Joe? Okay, well, can I say thank you, Joe, for your presentation?
Thank you.
And now we'll move on to the last agenda item, which is agenda item number 10, gifts and hospitality. And I believe Mr. Taylor is going to present this.
That's right. I was stepping in for Melanie on this one. Usually every 6 months we give an update on gifts and hospitality that has to be reported both by officers and members. The report this time, since the last committee in March, there's been no records of gifts and hospitality received, probably due to the COVID situation where officers aren't out attending events. Likewise, members aren't out and about attending. So there's nothing to report, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any questions, members? Well, can I thank each and every one of you for attending the committee meeting this afternoon, and I now declare it closed.